everyone, it's Miss Smith. Today we're going to be reading another tall tale, and it is called John Henry. Let's get started. Alright, I want you guys to listen to the story and try to see how it's similar or different to Paul Bunyan. So the really tall guy that cut down trees. In the 1860s, the United States was growing quickly. Immigrants were pouring in. The railroad companies were laying tracks that would carry settlers west. One of the railroad companies was called Chesapeake and Ohio, or the C&O for short. C&O Railroad was named for the two bodies of water it intended to connect, the Chesapeake Bay along the east coast and the Ohio River in the west. The engineers who planned the railroad had to overcome many challenges in order to get the trains from the Chesapeake Bay to the Ohio River. But no challenge was greater than this. They had to run their tracks through the Appalachian Mountains. The Appalachians were like a big wall that separated it from the east to the west. Sometimes when the mountains were rolling, more like hills, the C&O workers had to lay tracks over top of them. Other times they were able to lay them zigzag around the mountain like a snake, but sometimes the mountains were too tall to go over or too big to go around. In those cases, the only solution was to dig a tunnel right through the mountain. Digging tunnels was dangerous work. The tunnels were dark, poorly ventilated. That means that there was barely enough fresh air inside of the tunnels for the workers to breathe. Many workers were hurt by sudden cave-ins. So that means it falls down. So rocks fall down in the tunnel. To dig the tunnels as fast as they could, the railroad workers worked in teams of two. So we can see that they would be together. Okay. Next, the dynamite men would take over. Dynamite men would pack dynamite in holes and kaboom! The explosions would break up solid rocks into rubble. So they're trying to break it to dig the hole. One thing we are for sure of, let's back up. One of the steel driving men was named John Henry. No one knew for certain where John Henry was from. Some said he was from Georgia. Some even said Tennessee. Others said he was a Virginia man. As it turns out, it seems that he had just been around. For years, people thought he worked in the Big Bend Tunnel on the C&O line in West Virginia. But now, we think he more than likely worked in Lewis Tunnel in Virginia. One thing we are sure of is John Henry was a legend among railroad workers. So that means he's really, really well known for doing something really well. They sang a song that tells a story about how he was born, with a hammer in his hand. John Henry became known as the most courageous man who ever worked on a railroad. Even as a young boy, he could do the work of a man. Kind of like Paul Bunyan, because Paul Bunyan was the best axe cutter, and now we're saying that this guy, he's the best at digging with it, and he has a hammer in his hand. So instead of an axe, this guy's a hammer. They said that he's never been defeated in a steel driving competition. They said he'd hit the spikes so hard that sparks flew from the air. And John Henry could swing a 10-pound hammer from sunup to sundown and not even get tired. At first, almost all of the work in the tunnels were done by hands like John Henry. Eventually, this began to change. So we had a steam drill be created. And this was a drill that was powered by a steam engine. So kind of like super, it was like a really big like technology advance when they created this. Okay, let's keep going. One of the bosses blew a whistle. John Henry went to work driving the steel old-fashioned way with a hammer and a spike. The captain started up the steam drill and rattled beside John Henry, belching in steam and banging away at the mountain. The man and the machine worked side by side for hours. Then the boss blew his whistle again. The bosses took measurement and they announced the results. Do you think that machine or John Henry is going to win? I'm thinking John Henry. Let's see. John Henry had driven the spike a total of 15 feet into the mountain. And the steam drill, it had only drilled 9. John Henry dug 15 feet, and it was 9. And the other one was 9, so he still beat the drill. The other railroad workers roared. John Henry received a cheer as loud as a roar. They were excited that John Henry had won. He had shown the hard worker was better as a machine. But John Henry himself was in no condition to celebrate. He had worked so hard that he had suffered a heart attack. He laid down his hammer and died. The railroad man carried out John Henry of the tunnel. They laid him to rest with the other workers who had died. But the legend of John Henry lived on. The C&O Railroad was completed a couple of years later. And for years to come, whenever locomotives went down the C&O line past the tunnel, they thought of John Henry in him helping the tunnel be dug. There lies John Henry, the king of the steel driving men. So he's a legend because he was the best at this, and no one was better than him, and he helped out so much. So locomotive is a train. So they were building train tracks. And that is our story of John Henry.